My father, John Bernard Stacy, was a Londoner. He was the last of a family of three. He had an older brother, a sister, and himself. His father died when he was only 2, and his brother died in that same year. And I think of my grandmother bearing a husband and her oldest son, or older son, in the one year, and I am amazed. He was doing an engineering apprenticeship with Napier's, and when that company went bankrupt, my grandmother drew her money out of the bank and put him through the Marconi School of Wireless. He qualified as a ship's radio officer and went to sea, and he was only 19 when he started that work. He toured the world with the Blue Funnel Line. When they were in Sydney on one occasion, the crew went on strike. I often wonder whether that was mutiny, but anyway, the ship was in Sydney Harbour for several months, and my father and my mother met and got to know each other. They were both Anglican people. They were regular churchgoers. They read their Bible and they prayed. But my mother wouldn't marry him while he was at sea, and so several years later he swallowed the anchor in Sydney and retired from the sea and got a job working with the Amalgamated Wireless Company, AWA. First of all working in the factory, and then later on working in design. One of the radios he designed was called the Teleradio 3B, and he designed the receiver. A friend of my father's designed the transmitter. And that equipment became the radio of choice for the coast watchers in Papua New Guinea in the Second World War. And in fact, when later on in life, when they went to PNG, and I'll talk about that later, he was actually servicing the radios that he had designed in the 1930s. I was born in 1933, the second child in the family, the second son. And I was born in a little hospital that was run by a couple of very godly Christian women. My parents, although church-going people, my mother would say she wasn't saved. And when they saw the life of Christ alive in these two women, they committed their lives to Christ. The nurse's brother-in-law, Mr. Robert Baird at the Leichhardt Assembly, was one of the fellows who came regularly on a weekly basis to mentor my parents and to lead them deeper into their faith in the Lord Jesus. At one stage, my father was my Sunday school teacher. I was just a little boy at that stage, and I can remember very clearly him giving me a little slip of paper with Ephesians 2:8 written on it, so that I would be reminded to learn this verse. And as I learnt that verse, I realised that the next verse is actually part of the same sentence, verse 9. And those two verses together say, "For by grace are you saved, through faith, not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast." And that was an important thing for me to learn. Now, I didn't learn verse 10 until much later in life. Later on, Dad retired at age 62. He retired early because there was a need for a person like him. Christian Radio Missionary Fellowship was servicing radios, which are a very important part of life in Papua New Guinea. And he went to PNG, and he was actually servicing the Teleradio 3B that he had designed pre-war. Whenever I had a radio failure, I would arrange to meet Dad at Byre River Airstrip, and he would fix the radio and Mum would fix some coffee, and that was a great combination. But they had 2 years, they had a year at Rugli. They had a couple of years at Ukarumpa as house parents for missionaries' children. And then later they had a couple more periods of about 6 months each running the guest house for the Wycliffe Bible translators at Ukarumpa. And I see the way they went about their lives as being a fulfillment of the next verse that I didn't mention, or I didn't learn, but learned later on. And that says this: "For God, the Good News Bible says, for God has made us what we are, and in union with Christ, He has created us for a life of good deeds, which He's already prepared for us to do." And I see my father as an exemplar of that. He lived his life, and my parents, my mother too, lived their lives. They realised that God had given them gifts and skills, and they used those skills in the work of God. I think it was a great example, and I'm very thankful for my father and for my mother as well.